So, welcome all of you on a Saturday evening. Absolute delight to have Poonam Surie here. And if you see the bibliography, her own set of books, they cover everything from poetry to Chinese philosophy. And I read the book, the Confucius book. It's a sort of an autobiography, memoirs, travelogue, and a philosophy book rolled into one. And I had great fun I had great fun reading it. Uh, but before we go on to the conversation, I just want to make some opening comments. I talk to a lot of young people in Bangalore, elite kids going to, upper middle class, rich kids going to fairly good schools. And I ask them to name states of the United States and the state capitals. Most of them can get 20 states and the capitals. Most of them. A lot of them can get all 50 states. And they'll also tell you that Puerto Rico is a protectorate and Guam is somewhere and so on. So they can give you all of that to the United States. But you ask them the same question of China's provinces. What are China's provinces and what are the provincial capitals? You get a very, 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 very low hit rate. You know, you'll be lucky if you can get 5 out of 10. 5 out of how many ever they are. Actually, I don't know how many they are. 30 something. But if you're lucky if you can get five, and these are these are these are kids who are going to be growing up and forming public opinion and shaping the destiny of this country, and they don't know even a basic fact as the provinces of China and the state and the provincial capitals. To me, this is a manifestation of what I call epistemological insulation, right? Because geography has imposed a sort of informational distance, a cultural distance between China and India, despite being two old civilizations with a known history for 3,000 years. The amount of knowledge which we have of each other seems to be very, very, very rudimentary, very superficial. Geography has a lot to do with it because the Himalayas are a massive geographical border, prevent large scale movement of people, goods, ideas, money across the north south axis, which means that the kind of trade and intercourse India has along its east west axis is not the same as you would have in your north south axis. And that's an established fact. In fact, I was here exactly 15 years ago at the BIC when we spoke about Takshashila's first research project on studying China. And we talked about how the Himalayas are a strategic frontier. And the strategic frontier has a lot to do with our misunderstanding or non-understanding of each other. And then it's not a coincidence that when that strategic barrier came down, when large-scale movement of people became possible around the end of the 19th century, tensions began to rise. And 1962 was probably, a point in history where traffic was much easier ever before in history. And lo and behold, you had a kind of conflict. And then the nuclear weapons raised the Himalayas, strategic barrier again. I mean, conceptually, and then we are back where we started. Now, the epistemological insulation has consequences. One example of which it comes from the domain which I'm most familiar with, is international relations. Because very few people in India to this day understand how the Chinese classical worldview of international relations is. It's not the same as the Indian one. I mean, if you look at Indian statecraft from the time of the Arthashastra or in the Shanti Parva and all of that, you will see that there are many kings. The international system has many kings. Each king is a sovereign in that king's sovereign territory. It's very much like the Westphalian system of today, where you have multiple kings in a Rajamandala, right? Like, you arrange in a grid, and the Rajamandala has many kings. Each of them is a sovereign, has all properties of sovereignty, and then international relations is this dynamics of this, statecraft between kings, which involves warfare, trade, peace, etc. And the objective of given to each king is to become the master of the Rajamandal, right? You sort of conquer everybody. Therefore, you have a Arthashastra view that your neighboring king is an enemy and the enemy's enemy is a friend and so on. The important thing here is multiple sovereignties. The Chinese system does not recognize this. The Chinese system has one emperor under heaven. He has divine mandate, and he's the sole sovereign on earth. Everybody else is subsidiary to that. You're a tributary. If you're a near tributary, you're 20 paces from the emperor. If you're a distant tributary, you're 40 paces literally from the emperor. And then people far away from that who can't be civilized into Chinese culture are called barbarians, right? And what do you do with barbarians? You build a wall and you prevent the barbarians from interacting with you. Now, such a civilization, such a mindset does not recognize multiple sovereigns. So I was surprised when in the 16th century, European ambassadors, European traders would go to the emperor of China and say, I come to you in the name of the king of France, or I come to you in the name of the Pope, who is the sovereign of all Christians. And the Chinese would take these guys and put them in prison and say that, look, if you're here to claim that you're a representative of another sovereign, you go to jail, right? If you've come here to pay tribute to our emperor, then you're welcome. We'll figure out how you can talk to our emperor. So that mindset of a single sovereign, of a hierarchical international system, is very incompatible with the Indian way of looking things where you have multiple sovereigns. And when these two systems collide with each other, you have things like 1962, right? You have things like what's happening in the world today. For 2000 years, we didn't collide because the Himalayas were high enough. But now that you can actually, the north-south axis is not what it was, you have a lot more of these interactions. And unless we study and understand how China works, how the Chinese mind works, how classical Chinese thought influences modern Chinese behavior in all sorts of things. I just gave you an example of international relations, but it could be in culture, sports, art, literature, whatever that you can think of. Unless we have a broad understanding of how that works, we're not going to be able to deal with our important neighbor in a satisfactory way, right? So you could even say that many of the deep tensions that we have with the Chinese today are to some extent a consequence of this non-understanding of China. And I suppose there's a similar thing happening on the other side. The Chinese probably don't understand India enough, but that's their problem, right? And that's for them to solve. But for us, it's for us to be able to understand China. So in this context, I think we're very delighted to have Poonam. And I urge you to take a look at her books later. But in this conversation, what we'll do is we'll have a to and fro for half an hour to 40 minutes. We'll have a conversation up here. And then as soon as we can do so safely, we'll bring the audience in. Because I think when looking at the people in the audience, there's a lot more talent in the audience, views and points of view, expertise in various areas, which will be great to have, make it part of a single conversation as we go along, right? So over to you, Poonam. Why don't you just talk to us for about 10, 15 minutes for a start, get the ball going, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Okay. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for being here. And it would be wonderful to interact with all of you. It's always great to have a diversity of thoughts and ideas from other people. And I want to thank Ambassador Lata Reddy for being here. Thank you. And Nitin Pai. Thank you very much. And Adwaita for getting in touch with me. It's been wonderful to come to Bangalore, which is one of my favorite cities. And Dr. Aditi Suri lives here, our daughter. So I'm very pleased to be here. So I just want to begin with a few observations. We will go down the serious route after that. We were posted in China, and I thought it was a mystery. It was a beautiful country. It is a beautiful country. We traveled a lot all over. And I just realized that it was a mystery because people wouldn't talk to you about it. It's the Great Wall of Silence, I call it, instead of the Great Wall of China. And they would want to know a lot of things. They wouldn't ask you directly, but I knew that they had to report to the leader, and he had to report to the leader of the leader, and so on. So it was one day I saw a busload of people just going along the street, the road where our residence was, and totally expressionless, looking out. And I was really puzzled, and I decided that I was going to excavate into this forum and find out and decode the mindset of the people, because this is what really gets you into the, what the people believe in. And I know that I realize that there's a lot of information you get on TV, in the newspapers and on media about geopolitics and a lot of other things, international relations, etc. But once you know what people are thinking about, that is the most important. After all, what are the factors of production in any economy? Land, labor, and capital. Land is important. You have to look at the environmental issues. Labor is the most important. It's the human beings which run the economy and the society. It's very important to know what their mindset is. And capital, of course, is important, but labor is very important. And Professor Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize for Behavioral Economics in 2017, talked about this a lot, and he was given the Nobel Prize just for that. It is the culture or the mindset of the people, the behavior of the people, which affects the economy. That is very important, which people don't realize. It's okay to say the GDP of a country is so and so, but what really matters is their lives and how they have their lives improved with the GDP going up. So this was a new topic, and it's very relevant, I think. And as Professor Tansen Sen says, culture lubricates the wheels of commerce. So what does that mean? This culture is very important. The way the people think, their mindsets, is very important for society. So it was, a wonderful experience for me to just, I would say I started my yatra by traveling across the streets, talking to the normal people in Beijing. And my Mandarin was not that great. It was a broken Mandarin, but I managed to talk to them. I had some Chinese friends who would interpret for me, and walked along the hutongs. What are the hutongs? The old streets, which are now completely transformed into modern areas. People used to sit over there, and the courtyards had 3 or 4 homes where all the families would live together. The grandmothers would be seen sitting along the streets, peeling the peas and doing various things for their families. These people were moved out to multi-storied buildings, which they were not happy about, but that is what modern China is, modern Beijing is. And the coming out, I would say the stepping out or coming out party began when the Olympics were held in 2008. That is when China reached out to the world. And it was a very, we found that they were being very friendly. They were reaching out, and we managed to travel and talk to a lot of people. And the city was completely transformed. Lots of new buildings, completely done up again because of the Olympics. So one day I walked into, I was traveling, I was moving around the city with a friend from Sweden. We decided to go to a Buddhist temple. We went to the Fai Yuan temple, and there we found a person who spoke English. He explained everything to us. He was an academic, but he was in the temple. And then I found a monk who spoke Sanskrit. And they were very keen to talk to us about what is happening in India. It's the Buddhist connection. So it was, that was a very interesting thing for me. And I just decided to start looking and exploring what was going on in the country. We didn't know much about the society, Chinese society, and neither did they know about us. So as an Indian, I decided to start writing about India and China so that once we got to know about each other's cultures, this could be a launching pad for the future for collaboration and cooperation, which would help both our countries, the most populous countries in the world, and we could benefit from each other. Now, whether that would happen or not, and whether the world would be happy with not, is a question which is not very clearly answered. But the attempt was to make the Indians realize about Chinese society and the Chinese realize about Indian society. I had a lot of people who asked me a lot of questions. How do the Indians have such big eyes? What is the way that you have these? And what is a datun? How do you do this? So I explained. There was a couple who were very friendly with us. We went to Sichuan. This young student was given the job of taking me around the city while my husband was busy talking to the other people in the party. And she took me around and she said, "You are my Indian mother." I was rather taken aback, but I realized she was then posted to India in the embassy. And she wanted to know all kinds of things. Her husband wanted to know all this. I told him about Datun, what is Datun, and the neem trees, and he went to Chandni Chowk to hunt for that. So there were many, many questions which they wanted to know. They're very curious about Indian society. And so this is how, I just became very interested and started really looking at what was going on. So now the thing is that what did I find over there? That fascinated with the natural beauty of China, its culture and differences between our two countries, there's a marked divergence in political and cultural perspectives. Yet underneath the differences, there are also similarities and convergences. I had studied the links of India and China and the revival of Buddhism, which was part of a larger revival of religion in China, in my first book, China's Search for Its Soul. Leaves from a Beijing diary. My book dealt with the historical links of India with China, the Silk Route, a Chinese society today, its evolution and the problems arising from the changes in the country, including the move towards private enterprise as materialism becomes the new mantra. The entering of the capitalist ideology, along with the communist ideology, is leaving a lacuna which is a fertile ground for new ideologies. And maybe cross-fertilization of cultures as China reaches out to the world and deals with them. So this book started, the Confucius books was done when I went to China to actually search, to talk to people about Confucius. Went to the Confucius Institute. I went to Qufu, that is the birthplace of Confucius. It was very interesting. And there was also a conference over there where Xi Jinping actually came for that. And the thing is that Confucianism is a very old philosophy, but it was completely, the party's been using it for its own purposes. Sometimes it was just swept under the carpet and not talked about. There was a statue which was set up in the Tiananmen Square, around the Tiananmen Square in 1911, and it disappeared after a few hours, a statue of Confucius, and nobody knows why it happened. There was something, and I went to the Hanban, that is the Institute of Confucian Studies, and they told me that Confucianism is not the ideology of the party. But of late, I find that Confucianism has become very relevant. Xi Jinping talks about it. A little statue has been set up outside the party school, the Communist Party school, and he talks a lot about it now. There are certain aspects which are not to be considered by the party because it doesn't suit them to talk about it. One of them being that if the leader is not the right person, he or she can be removed. That is not something that the party would want. But, there is, being a sort of atheist country, they need an identity. And Taoism and Buddhism has come from another country. So their own philosophy, that is Confucianism, is very important for them. It also sets their own identity. It's a completely Chinese philosophy. And why is it being used for various things? How is it being used? And how does the party keep the society in control is something we will discuss after this. So this was why, and the one book which I've written after that, which has only been published recently, was started just before the pandemic. It's called Contemporary China, Tradition and Modernity. They're all connected. That's why I'm just talking about it. And this has all kinds of issues about contemporary China, all the problems and all the things. Well, they've achieved a lot. I wouldn't say they're just problems. They have achieved a lot. Poverty alleviation has been great. And there are many things which even we can learn from them. Science and technology, how they've advanced so much. But the thing is that these ideologies are being used by the party for their purposes. It suits them. So we will go over all these things once we start discussing. There are all kinds of issues like the aging population, demographic U-turn, which means that the one-child policy was changed to a two-child policy, and now it's the three-child policy, which is not being taken in a very good way by the society. They just feel some people don't want to get married. They want their freedom. They want to live their lives as they do. And Xi Jinping is stressing, because of the aging population, they feel that the population will come down, the young people. So he's been encouraging women to now concentrate on having children. And I don't think the women are very happy with that. They're doing well with whatever business they're doing. None of them was in the Politburo Standing Committee, except for Mao's wife, I think, right? So, they also feel that they need to get some more importance, although they're doing well in business and all other things. But so the things have, there are many things. We also know that there is a 996 generation, Gen Zs. 996 means from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And they are a little tired and stressed. We saw on media, I saw that there were some suicides. Some people just left.
Let me just pause you there.
Yeah.
We'll talk about 996,
Sure,
right?
sure.
But I think let's preface this. Sorry to have interrupted you.
No problem.
But what if we start this conversation by understanding briefly what Confucian philosophy is?
Right.
I mean, just unpack that for us, because I think a lot of us
understood.
we sort of, including me, we nod our head when we say, what this guy is saying, but what does it actually entail?
Yeah, I'll tell you. Yes, on Confucius, Confucian philosophy, which is what we're talking about today. We will later connect it to the current issues if we have the time and if we are interested. So Confucianism was actually, Confucius was at that time, that is 551 to 459 AD, BC, sorry. It was all about, he was a humble person, and what he really stressed was filial piety, benevolence, and rituals, and society, respecting each other and treating each other like family. First of all, the family was very important, and then he said it should stretch out like water ripples in a lake or water in a river to the rest of society and to other countries. So it was Ren, which was benevolence, Li, which was rituals. He said rituals are very important, behavior is very important, and and family, filial piety, which was Xiao. So these were the things which were stressed, which were emphasized by Confucius. There were many people during that time who were also his, who followed him. Mencius, and there were hence and all kinds of philosophy, people, academics and students of Confucius, I would say. Also, the very important thing for him was education. And he said the aptitude of students is very important, because that is what brings the brilliance out. It's not just studying, it's also how hard you work and your aptitude. So the teacher should realize the aptitude of the student and encourage the student to follow that particular topic or that particular subject. And so I think these were the basics.
Yeah, he's also the guy who set up the entrance exam, right? I mean,
Yes,
it's
right.
Confucian thinking which led to them setting up the
Yes,
entrance exam, which has endured for 2,500, 2,200
absolutely.
years,
Yes.
which they still continue to have. It's like a UPSC equivalent.
Yeah.
They've done that for as a result of his thinking. Uh, Now, if I understood this Confucius right, he seems to be this nice, kindly, benign face of Chinese philosophy, right? He's
Yeah.
stressing on good behavior. He's stressing on respecting moral norms. He's saying, everybody is a family.
Yeah.
It's this Vasudeva Kutumbakam equivalent, uh, where everybody is a family, but it is hierarchical.
I
Uh,
totally agree with
and
you.
and the emperor
Yes.
still is number one,
Yeah.
and then there is society, then there's family, and then the
Yeah.
individual is at the bottom, right? But it's not a sharp, negative, malicious way of looking at it. By saying this hierarchy is harmonious, isn't that what he
Yeah.
said?
Yeah. And for one, ancestral worship is something that has been criticized a little bit, because it's okay to worship your ancestors. That's wonderful. But if you would try to get them into the realm of the importance in society, then that perhaps won't be the right thing to do. It's the merit, it's the brilliance of the person that should matter, the exam, as you said. For example, if we bring all the princelings into the party, that wouldn't be the correct way to do it. So there are some elements which have been criticized a little bit, but the rest, I think, are quite relevant in all societies today.
Right. And I also read about the attitude towards women was very different, isn't it? And you're saying
Yes.
that it's okay to let your sister-in-law drown, but you can't touch her because touching your sister-in-law was not kosher, not allowed, or something of that nature, isn't it?
That I've not read, I have not heard about, but you may be right. Yes, if you have. But yes, the role of women is also something which is being argued. And I mean, some people believe that he just wanted the woman to support the family and be part of that. And some believe that no, it was an equal, partnership between the man and the wife, the husband and wife. So this is a bit of a, something which is being argued about, has been argued about.
Yeah. And then and if you come from jump from there into my realm of international relations, what's interesting is uh, the first emperor of China, the so-called first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, uh, he modeled his empire on an entirely different philosopher called Han Fei,
Yeah.
right? And Han Fei is the legalist tradition.
Right.
The legalist is a counterpoint to
Yes.
Confucius. So they
Agreed.
sort of rejected it around 200 BC.
Yeah, you see, Confucius believed in, just solving the problem, litigation, and just arbitration, and just that the family would sort it out, and the society, the elderly people would sort it out. But later on, I think it was realized that the legal system is important. So it was just that, things have to change. You have to, you see, as you say, as we know, the sinicization of Buddhism, I would say this is the sinicization of Confucianism. So now the legal system is very relevant, and people are, obviously, they know what their rights are and what they should know that. So this was an ancient thought, and now I think as China deals with the world, they realize that the legal system is very important.
Right. So in a way, it was. I mean, I found this paradoxical when I was reading because all the way from the first emperor, they followed a principle called legalism, which was almost Cautilian, right?
Yeah.
It is hard power. It's about the emperor keeping the population under his thumb, using the law. Uh, and I think to an extent it is to this day, as you said. But the PR is always about Confucius, right? Confucius is always cited as this great, nice person, is this family relationships and niceness. But the state actually does the very opposite.
Well, I think that's what I mean. As long as it suits them, they believe in Confucianism. And Xi Jinping has been talking of late of the rebirth of traditional culture. He's been really emphasizing that. Now, why is that? I mean, now we just come briefly to the contemporary issues. Why is that? Domestic consumption. They want domestic consumption. This is the dual circulation strategy, which is now very important for them.
Explain that for us, the dual circulation.
Well, it's it's about domestic consumption, but also about dealing with the world, exports and imports. But the domestic consumption becomes very important. Some of the rural people have moved to the urban areas, so the middle class has gone up, and the domestic consumption has gone up, but it still needs to be to go up more. And why do we want to stress the emphasize the local culture? Because a lot of young people were buying things which were Western brands, and even when I was there, the malls were all full of these things. They want them to buy the local products, Swadeshi, So this is what made in India we talk about. This is what they want to do, made in China. So that would help the economy. So that's important for them. So that's why they're emphasizing the culture. And even in the Forbidden City, there are those areas where they have exhibitions, and they have a lot of Chinese deities and all around, so that the younger generation is more aware of that. And environmental issues, whereas Confucius believed in humans in nature and not humans and nature. Humans are a part of nature, and not that humans will, totally, boss over the environment. So there are lots of issues which, these Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism is helping the party, to deal with these things. So.
Okay, so let's come to we discussed this on WhatsApp. The question is, if you look at the 20th century, the Chinese have gone through massive upheavals, right?
Right.
So there was the Boxer Rebellion. There's they have
Yeah.
the revolution. They have a nationalist revolution. Then they have the World War. Then there's the Japanese invasion, part of the World War. Internal civil war, separation. Then there is communism, and in communism you have cultural revolution.
Absolutely.
And then finally you have Deng Xiaoping, right? And now you have Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
Now, through all of this, and during cultural revolution, they literally went after the
Absolutely.
intellectuals and wiped them out. Right?
Yes.
How is it that they've been able to retain intellectual culture of Confucianism or legalism or any of these things? How have they been able to preserve their philosophical traditions?
Well, it's because, you see, when you need something, you use it. That's the thing. So it was the Mayfair, movement, which also destroyed everything was thrown into the dustbin, all these traditions and all these philosophies. And then, of course, the Cultural Revolution from, I think it was 66 to 76 that Mao actually did this. But I also realized that Mao also used some of the Confucian philosophies in his talks, in the speeches that he gave. So it was all very well to say that traditions and everything should be just left behind and we should move ahead to change China. But I don't think that these Confucian values were just thrown into the bin. So they came back. Deng Xiaoping came, and then he opened the economy, and he realized that these things are relevant. And the other thing is that Confucianism is also linked to business. And our management guru, Peter Drucker, talks about it a lot. He said that Confucianism is one of the best philosophies to follow when you are dealing with your colleagues in a business organization, because you show them respect, and you have to have a community who you respect, who you treat as your family, and that makes a big difference. And then you have a surplus, which you get. Now, Confucius had said that profit making is not the right thing, is not the only thing that you should do when you have a business. But Peter Drucker says that it's important to have profits. You have that, because you want to use the surplus for your own business instead of taking, things from society and from the rest of the country to pay the labor. So these are things which, they're relevant. And
So uh, it survived through things like business
yes,
and
and
so
it
on.
survived. It's still, we are talking, they're talking about it.
But did they destroy any of these things in the culture? I mean, did they destroy the texts and during the
Yes, I think it was more not so much about Confucianism, but it was all the Buddhist temples, all the statues were melted and used. All the brass and metal statues were destroyed. Everything was destroyed. Anything cultural and traditional and religious was destroyed. And so, that was it. But then it all came back. So, and he's still talking about Confucianism and the fact that he came to Qufu for this, for his birth anniversary is quite,
something?
yeah,
Yeah.
something we could
Okay.
understand.
Yeah, I just want to take you to a slightly different territory. Uh, in my office, I have a big poster of Bodhidharma on my wall.
Right.
And people think that, oh, is this because you're Buddhist or whatever? I say, look, uh, Bodhidharma is a guy who conquered China, intellectually conquered China, set up a branch of Buddhism. There's a lot of evidence of the Chinese adopting Indian
Yes.
philosophy, Indian ideas
Yes.
in the past, right? In classical. But has there been anything on the other side? Have you come across anything which, like, why, for example, is there no culture of Confucianist thinking in India?
So
Or, any intellectual tradition that we have absorbed from China?
first, let me just tell you about what you said earlier about them absorbing or looking at the Indian philosophies. Yes, Bodhidharma came from the south, and he came to the Shaolin monastery, and there was Kung Fu. There's a long story about that, and a lot of people worship Bodhidharma, and certainly left his mark. It's called Damu over there. And so one of the things is, I will come to that later. Why is Buddhism so important for the
You can
party?
also talk about Kumarajiva, who's
Yes,
featured in your book. Yeah.
Kumarajiva came, and you see what has happened. What had happened is Xuanzang had come to India, and stayed here for 16 years. Went to Nalanda and to various other parts of the country, just to see what Buddhism was about, what was happening. The myth is that one of the emperors saw something like some gold thing going across the sky. He asked his minister, I think it was a dream. He asked his minister, and the minister said, it may be Buddha. So the emperor sent an 18-member team to India to find out more about Buddha. And these two monks came on a white horse, Kashyap Matanga and Dharmaratna. And the first Buddhist temple was set up in Loyang. So that was how Buddhism came, across the Silk Road, of course. But yes, Xuanzang, and we were talking about, what were we saying?
Bodhidharma and Kumarajiva.
Yes, Bodhidharma and yes, Kumarajiva. So the sutras were, being translated into Chinese across. They were not done in a very organized way. So they were a little confused about Buddhism. But when Kumarajiva came, I think it was 410. So he just did the translation so well that it became a very easy thing for them to follow and more organized. What he would do is he would translate and then he would read it out to the society. And if anybody had any questions, he would answer. And if somebody suggested something, he would change that so that it would be easier for them to follow. So Kumarajiva was an important person at that time. And so why is it that Buddhism is being allowed to be followed by the party? It's a $1 billion economy because of tourism. Next to the Loyang temple, they have set up an Indian stupa with, from, Sanchi, that kind of design. So the materials came from India. There was an agreement set up at the time of Prime Minister Vajpayee. And then the land was given by the Chinese. Now there's a Thai temple also, an Indian and a Buddhist temple. And there's a lot of tourism. And they really encouraged tourists to come, and it's become a billion-dollar economy. The other thing is all these philosophies are being used to calm the society because, because of all the stress, because of materialism and all the problems in today's world, they need some philosophies to keep them calm. And also, they have a total control over all the temples. The director of the temple definitely, I spoke to him in Faiwan. He said China is the center of the Buddhist world. And I was a little taken aback because, after all, Buddhism came from India. But, they use it as soft power. Mahayana Buddhism and Theravada, which is Theravada is for the Southeast Asian countries at which, they're not emphasizing that much, but Vajrayana, which is the Tibetan one. So for them, it's also a soft power issue. That is one of the reasons that they're using that. And they're also, they make in the Buddhist society, Chinese Buddhist society makes a lot of donations when there's a problem. For example, if there's an earthquake or a tsunami or something, they make a lot of donations, and they prefer that instead of getting the NGOs to fund them, because that would just trigger off something maybe against the party. So they've got total control over the temples. There is somebody who follows everything in the temple, and some of the monks are members of the party. So they benefit. And also, they keep total control over the temples. And there's a lot of this 996 and the younger people who come now. It's, they just come to the temples. They're a little tired of all this stress. They'll come to the temple and just spend the whole day over there. Some have moved to the rural areas. And they might come to the city to just, have to work for a few hours. But they're a bit stressed out, as I had mentioned earlier, and we thought we would talk about it later. So,
We'll just get to that.
Yeah.
Before that, just one question. The Confucians and the Buddhists were not really friends for much throughout history, right? The Confucianists thought that the Buddhists are competition,
Right.
And so on. How is it today? In today's China, are they friends? Are they competitors? Are they?
Yeah, all three of these philosophies, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, have merged into something very similar, taking things from each other, taking each other's philosophies, using them. When Buddhism came to China, it added a lot of music and other cultural aspects to Confucianism and Taoism. Lots of new words and new ideas. So it's all been imbibed and it has become Sinicized. It's called Chinese Buddhism. Everything is with Chinese characteristics, as you know. Marxism with Chinese characteristics, communism. Yeah, so this is also a part of that. So now all three of them have imbibed from each other, and it's quite peaceful now.
Okay. So now let's come to the 996, right? Because the thing, just want to preface it because it's an important part of our conversation, and I think that's why she's hinted it a couple of times. We thought about we should talk about this because two things seem to have happened, right? One is because of the one-child policy, which they've very successfully carried out for the last 25, 30 years, family structures have collapsed, right?
Yes, right.
For an Asian family, much like an Indian family, you're generally used to a large clan. Asian families have words called fufa, fufi, all sorts of words which don't exist in Western. You just have an uncle. Right? You have a fufa, fufi. In Indian, in Konkani, we have similar words for all sorts of relatives. I'm sure that the similar kind of a large family structure existed, which sort of, that's why Confucius talks about it, and which sort of gave social protection, emotional support, financial support, all through all stages of life. Now, when the family collapses, and now you just have one grandchild, and there are, one set of parents and two sets of grandparents doting over that one grandchild, and most people, therefore, substantially alone, right? They're not
Yes.
connected to family structure. That's one. The second is this whole idea of 996 culture, which, I must appreciate it at one level because it comes from a realization that for China to compete on a global scale, people have to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, right? Because your productivity is still much lower than that of the West. So if you have to compete with the West, you have to raise your productivity to get there, right? Productivity can be raised by improving your tools and the instruments that you use, the processes that you use, or by working longer hours. Of course, now when you say 996, not everybody wants to work 9 hours, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And even if those who want to work that long burn out pretty quickly, right? And it has those consequences. So I just wanted you to address these two. In terms of Chinese society, the dramatic changes that have happened in the last just 25, 30 years, which is a blip in Chinese history, but the
Right.
changes are so dramatic. How does how does such a society process even things like philosophies like Confucius? Is Confucianism helping them at all, or they're just grappling onto it, or where do you see this going?
I think it's just that's why Xi Jinping is stressing, emphasizing the traditional philosophies and the rebirth of traditional culture. It's all about these philosophies, and they're hoping that, the filial piety and everything will work, and the frugality, of families. They're not. Now we see that domestic consumption has come down. People are not spending that much. And, these young people feel, I've been just seeing on media platforms, we will not eat that much. I will have this much, but I can manage. I'm not going to work the whole month. Now, there is also the gig economy, where a lot of young people want to work, but for as long as they want. They don't want to take on, and also because of unemployment. There's a lot of unemployment. And also, I find that the companies are now preferring to take on the graduates, the younger graduates, because they will not have to pay them that much, and they have a longer working life. And also, they're probably unmarried. They'll have more time to give to the business companies. So these are, all these things. And Confucius said that, the people who need help should be given help. For example, the widows, widowers, and all these aging people should be. It's all because of filial piety and all the, thoughts about looking after family. So, I mean, this is an issue which is very modern, which is very relevant in today's world. It's not just happening in China. I think it's more or less, a lot of people are feeling, young people are stressed out. So, this is something which we will have to observe in the future, what will happen with all this. But certainly, I think because it's a calming balm, it's being, they're hoping that it will help these ancient philosophies. What does Taoism say? Take it in your stride, be flexible, and just take it. And yin and yang, which means a balance. And I would say that even I believe that yin and yang, I mean, India and China could learn from each other, coming to a different point, of course, we're just moving ahead. Why? Because authoritarianism and democracy are two different things, but you need a little bit of both to run the country. So a balance is very important in, whichever sphere you look at, politics, society, whatever. So, these are things which since you said, what did we get from the Chinese? I think it's more than philosophies. We're looking at, okay, the Confucian philosophy is quite relevant. We are looking at science and technology, poverty alleviation, and the productivity. For example, the Chinese universities are now on the top of, they've been, they think now that they're really very good, they're doing very well. So, I mean, these are the things which, we can learn from them. Modernization of military equipment, that kind of thing. And yeah.
I think it's time to bring in
Yeah.
our friends in the audience. Do raise your hands, comments, questions. If they are fast and sharp, it works best. But
Question is short and sharp, but may not be relevant to the topic. But nonetheless, India and China have one thing in common. they have laws in place, but the rule of law to strictly apply across levels and hierarchies really doesn't happen. You can get away with a lot of murder in both countries. What is it that causes this whole phenomena to come about? Contrast this to the Western world where rule of law generally, I mean, of course, now with Trump and the likes coming in, things have changed, but by and large, it has applied. So, what is it that is so different about these two ancient civilizations versus the Western world?
We'll come to this gentleman here later, but would you agree with the idea that there is less rule of law in China?
I'm sorry, I don't. Look at the world, what's happening. Look at the crimes being committed. Look at what they get away with. I mean, that is my view. I maybe.
But compared to India, would you say China is a more law-abiding society, contemporary China?
I would, yes, because it's all very well, sort of controlled.
Because of the fear, right? Is it because the
There
fear
is
of...
corruption. I wouldn't say that, nothing is perfect in any country, but I think there's a lot of surveillance and, keep a lot of checks so that the dissent doesn't come out against the party. So that's important. Surveillance and keeping control. That's important. And that helps.
To the India question, if I could come in, I think the challenge for us is many of our laws, including the Constitution of India, are orthogonal to social norms and practices. Right? So you're trying to get people to obey a certain set of laws which they think are foreign to them, which they sort of don't completely accept and internalize. So that has it's probably because we were a colonial state and the Republic of India is a post-colonial state which inherits. I mean, your lowest government official of India, Republic of India, is still called a collector. He's not the district collector. Is the very word collector implies extractive state, right? We haven't even changed the name and the function of that. So there is a little bit of resistance to the laws which seem to have been imposed on the population from somewhere up high. And that causes a sense of legitimacy. That's what I would call it the root cause of, and it's not something which you can solve with greater enforcement. I will give you an example. Let's say you're on a scooter and you're driving on the wrong side of the road in Bangalore. Right? Now, the traffic cop is cut of the same cloth as the guy who was riding a scooter. Right? The traffic cop is not, some guy from Germany who's his brother or his uncle. And they have the same set of norms and set of idea of legitimacy of traffic rules. And the traffic cop is unlikely to penalize that guy for going on the wrong side, right? So I think we have that, which is a deeper conversation, as said, it's tangential to this.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to make that point, sir.
Just sorry to interrupt, just two things which I forgot about Confucius, Guangxi and Mianxi. Guangxi is networking and Mianxi is saving face. So that is very important, and I think it's important in every society. Okay, please go ahead.
During the Cultural Revolution, Mao and his Red Guards totally discredited and rejected Confucianism and destroyed all the books written by him or something like that. What impact it had with the people? Was it temporary, and how it had a widespread impact, or how it was dealt with? And another question is, there are some other philosophies, that's called Mohism or something in China. Are they popular still, or how will you?
Sorry?
Mohism is asking.
Oh.
This is, not related to Confucius. I just wanted to know. My basic question is, this Mao's this thing, they say no, it encourages bad element and all. When he totally rejected Confucius, did it have, what was the impact it had in minds of China, the people of China?
I think it had a negative impact, and they were not able to say that much. But now when I talk to people, this is what I hear. They talk about the Cultural Revolution and how it destroyed everything. So it was probably a negative thought, for the citizens.
But when you were there, you were there in the 2000s, isn't it?
Yeah.
in the 2000s. Did you see traces of the consequences of the Cultural Revolution in among the people you met?
Not really.
People
We
who had
just
the
spoke
scars
to
of
people.
that?
We
No.
spoke to some people about the Cultural Revolution, and they were not very, happy to talk about it. But at that time, no, it was there was a transition from the communists to a sort of uh, you know to a proper society where there were it was moving ahead.
So that sort of put it behind them.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I can tell you an anecdote about the Cultural Revolution. So I had a professor, a mainland China professor, and of public policy. So we were having a conversation, and then we went to a Indian restaurant, and I ordered dum aloo. And I wanted to, among all the things is dum aloo. And he saw the dum aloo, and he started his expression changed, started sweating. And then a few minutes later, he said, I'm done. Let me go home. and the dinner sort of ended very abruptly. Next day, I asked him, what actually happened? Are you all right? And he says, during the Cultural Revolution, I was sent to the countryside, and we had to survive on potatoes and potatoes and potatoes alone.
Right.
So the sign, the look, when he looks at potatoes, he just is reminded of the Cultural Revolution, and you would just sort of get into a PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder kind of situation.
Yes, I do understand. It's exactly what I felt when I spoke to people. Though they didn't have
They didn't express
that,
it, but yeah.
because the generation was different, or maybe whatever. The people we met were not those people. But anyway, it was a similar.
Yeah, it's just like
reaction.
COVID, right? You just want to put it behind you. You
Yes.
don't want to think about it.
Absolutely right.
There was a question somewhere at the back. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a few quick comments, and you can respond to any of them. One is, should I stand up?
Ma'am, can I ask you to stand up?
Yeah.
Yes,
so that we can
please.
see you.
Thanks. My name is Anupa, and one of the things that happened with the one-child policy was this 4-2-1 model, where each child was brought up by 2 parents and 4 grandparents, didn't have siblings in their generation, and didn't have cousins in the next generation. And that might have impacted the networking,
Yes.
as a value. Also, that coupled with the fact of only one emperor might have created a very inward-looking, self-centered culture. So, do you have a point of view on that, where sharing and accepting differences, tolerance, those kind of values were not taught at home because there was no sibling?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. And there was no larger community of extended family, or acknowledged, in case they were sent away to the villages. The other thing is that Confucius himself once described education as making people human,
Yes.
and human in the sense of interacting in society. And I've helped write the preface of a book which explores early childhood education in several Southeast Asian societies. So in the context of him actually having the vision of talking about making children human and humanizing them into, not humanizing some, socializing them into society, that's what education should do. How far have they moved from that model? And if you could respond to either of these. Yeah.
Okay, first, just to talk about Confucius, what he said was that education is not only for the person who's being educated; it's for do some research on things which can help society, medicine, do health, and all those things, and as I mentioned, aptitude. Just because we were talking about education, I just realized that this is what he said, and there was a lot of sadness about this, the one child policy. This lady who I told you about, she came and she said, I have no siblings, I don't know what to do. Then they moved to Vancouver. Now they have 4 children over there. So, obviously this was something which, but the strange thing is that now they don't want to have 3 children because it's very expensive. So, and also I think now a lot of women are working and they feel that it will interfere with their working lives if they have so many children to look after. And all the ties that the maids that they used to have to look, that's very expensive. Education is expensive. So the government will have to do something, to give them some benefits and all that. And I think which they will do.
Sorry, social conformism, because these are both countries, India and China, with very large populations, where societal norms dictate human behavior a lot more than the actual law, because it's so tough to administer so many people. So maybe that's, in a society like the West, where there are maybe fewer people, you can have a more litigious culture. And, because people are more aware of the law, and the law is constantly changing with the legal system that they have. But in collective cultures like India and China, maybe the social conformism creates more abide, obedience of the law than that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would take that as a comment. I mean, I think both of us would sort of
Agree
vibe
with
with what
that.
you're saying.
Yeah.
But let me just tell you an anecdote about the one-child policy. Okay, this is from a different country, but also Confucian Chinese dominate. This is from the government of Singapore, where I was for a period of time a civil servant. Now, you might want to sit down. So
Thanks. Thank you.
in the 70s, just like in India, there was this thing about hum do hamare dono, we two, ours two. So they encouraged people to have only two babies. So in the 70s, and I think this is where what I think you were saying is a conformist culture. So the Singaporean population responds very, very, very quickly. Of course, it's a smaller city state, so policy changes and the effects of policies are felt very quickly, right? So we do ours too. They started having two children, and the number of fertility rate came down. Everybody was having two children, and then they found that this is still not enough. They said, look, two is also going to be too large. We need to reduce it. So in the 80s, they said stop at one, and Singaporeans started stopping at one. In the mid 90s, they realized that, oh my God, fertility rate is below replacement rate. Women are having less than two children on an average. That means you're not going to be able to replace the population. So only choices we have are immigration. But immigration means that our political values might be shaken up. This is a small city state, 3-4 million people. If you get 1 million people from China, then they'll bring Chinese communist thinking into Singapore, and then you'll have problems. So we've got to do something. We've got to encourage our women to have more babies. And they said, okay, here's a system. We're going to have baby bonuses now. So the second child, every child gets you a bonus. It's paid into your provident fund account. So it's a large amount of money, $10,000 for the first child. They figured out, it's still not working. So they raised the stakes. You'll get 10,000 for your first child, 14,000 for your second child, 16,000 for your third. I forget the numbers. But they were paying people to have babies up to the fourth child. Now, here's the danger part. What part of the population do you think took up this offer? The part of the population that was poorer and dependent on the state, which meant that not only were you paying out bonuses for people to have babies, the kind of people who had babies were also the kind of people who would depend on the states. They wouldn't be, taxpayers and, part of the growing economy. So the challenges of adverse selection in population policy are, I think China and Chinese populations tell us this. Don't mess with population policy.
Yes,
it can
exactly.
create kind of consequences which you can't just imagine what's going to happen.
I mean, I saw on media, we are not pigs. We can decide what we want. But it was removed from media within seconds, obviously. Yeah.
Okay. There's a hand there, and then we'll come to you.
Yeah, hi. So the question is to either of you. I think it was 1 year or 2 years back, I saw a Malaysian comedian, if I'm not wrong, or a Singaporean. He was saying that Indians are not Asians.
Who are not Asian?
Indians are not Asians. So I think it is a very valid critic in the sense that because, I don't know, somehow Indians are so okay with accepting that we are South Asians when it's sort of the reverse, that Indian subcontinent itself sort of branched out to different, like you mentioned, China through Bodhidharma, and it went to Japan. And most of the other landlocked countries like Myanmar, everyone had their fair share of indigenous values, but they adopted very easily simply because it was the Indian perspective. So, in that sense, coming to the correlating this with China, because we have the example of North Korea somewhat totally, sorry, not North Korea, South Korea, totally losing their indigenous values and systems and becoming sort of homogenized in current days. So, do you think these are a perspective from a lot of philosophers that China will end up as a postmodernist Christianized country in the next 50 years, like pretty much North Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia?
Do you think so? That
Do you think
China
that will happen?
become a post-modernized, Christianized society in the next 20 to 50 years?
There is a lot of Christianity, and there is, in China, I mean, maybe not, it's not answering the question that he's asking, but in China, it's not really religion that is followed. You use various religions or various philosophies for your own purpose. Somebody whose child has an exam will go to a Confucian temple. Somebody whose health is not good will go to a Taoist temple where you have a horse over there. You touch the horse's neck, and if you have a problem with your neck, it will be resolved, they say. And if you go to a Christian, one of the young Chinese ladies I met, she said, I am going to follow Christianity because I want to connect with the Western world. So yes, there is, but I'm not exactly sure. What is the question?
He's saying, will China lose its traditional moorings and become this westernized, Christianized?
I don't think so. It will absorb something as it suits the Chinese, maybe a bit of, to deal with the Western world, you need to have some things, some Christianity in your thing. There was an arrangement with the Holy See, with the Pope, about who's going to be made the head of the, churches. So, but apparently it's not been followed. It was to be on till revived in October 2024, but it's not clear. So obviously they know they have to deal with the world. So a bit of it will be, taken in their stride, but it will not destroy the Chinese identity, which is what the philosophies are all about. I don't think so.
I'd like to go to the time of Confucius. So 5th century BC, you said. What was it about the Chinese society, the social structure, the cultural environment that made this person resonate at that time? So what is the context in which this came up?
Imperial and also there were the warring states. There was a lot of thing going on between the states, and I think they just needed that he became more, visible because of all that. Because I think people were probably not in a state where they could think positively. So what he said was probably very relevant at that time. We'll have to go down the history route to check exactly what was happening at that time. But I think it was the warring states. Yeah.
But there's also a lot of literature about the actual age, right? Because that 5th century BC was when you had Buddha in India.
Yes, you had a lot of...
some Jewish prophets
exactly.
around the same time. So there's some kind of a global change in human society.
Yes,
which brought
they
up
were
new
wondering.
ideas.
Yeah, I can read it out if you want.
Please do.
Yeah, so what I have written, the call of the ancients took me to that part of China where years ago was born a great sage around the same time that was born Gautam Buddha. The period 800 BCE to 200 BCE is known as the axial age, a term coined by the German philosopher and psychiatrist Karl Jaspers. At this time in India, China, Greece, and the Middle East, human consciousness made people question who they were and how they wanted to live their lives. Philosophy and religion flourished, and the tenets of these belief systems, these values, and these religions were to influence humans for all times to come. The rise of Platonism, the emergence of the Upanishads, Zoroastrianism, the birth of Gautam Buddha, Parsva, the 23rd Tirthankara in the 9th century BCE, Mahavira, the 24th Tirthankara in the 6th century BC, and the founders of Jainism lived during this period in India. Confucius and Lao Tzu in China, Homer, Socrates, Parmenides, Thucydides, and Jeremiah and All these were some of the other axial figures who were to be significant in the annals of world history.
Yeah, so it happened sort of around the world around that time. I mean, cultural evolution will probably tell you what happened, but something must have happened. Maybe migration was possible. People started moving around, so they were taking ideas from one part of the world to the other, and so on, right? So there's something which happened.
Also, why Christianity came in. I just
Yeah.
spoke to this person who's, the business ethics, the general secretary of the business ethics, university in Beijing. He said it was connected to the IIM. They also had a branch here in the IIM Bangalore, which I was quite interested in. So he said that Marco Polo had gone from roaming from China to Europe, and he described Chinese as a very bright, rich city. That's how the Christians, they came from, Europe. And this Matteo Ricci came, and he translated all the, he got everything translated into Chinese, and that's how this Christianity also spread in China.
But I've also heard of the other tradition, where Christianity in China is much older than the arrival of the Europeans, because Genghis Khan was Christian. Genghis Khan's grandmother was Christian. So Nestorian Christianity had arrived in China through another route, through the Silk Route, before the Europeans came.
Right.
So, but that's a different type of
Yes.
Christianity. It's not the modern Christianity that you think
Yeah.
of.
Genghis Khan was a
Yeah, yeah.
Mongolian.
Genghis Khan, yeah.
I have a slightly controversial set of comments about
Wonderful. Please.
Yeah. Go
One
ahead.
is, we talk about Confucius as being widespread, Confucianism as being widespread in China. Most of China was illiterate until very recently. At most, they may have heard of Confucius, but they certainly hadn't read Confucius. They couldn't have read Confucius. As recently as perhaps the 80s, the majority of Chinese were illiterate. Now, to say that this was the dominant thing, it was dominant in the dominant sections of society. People like Mao were familiar with Confucius, but not others. So the reason I'm making this point is that to say that this is widespread in society is perhaps slightly misleading. By the same token, one can say that, for example, the one-child policy that we've been talking about is post-Mao. It was not then. So it came about much later. So it was actually people like Deng Xiaoping who were supporting this one-child policy. The supposed liberalizers of China were, in a sense, being very rigid about some other aspects. The same thing is true of India, that until recently, if one talked about the Vedas or the Upanishads, etc., most people had heard the names, but that's about it. As in China, most people in India were illiterate until fairly recently. Talking about the one-child policy, this is anecdotal. I've been to China only once, but I had the good fortune to have a very long conversation with a middle-level civil servant in the People's Bank of China. And I asked him about this one-child policy. He was from central China, of peasant stock, the first person from his village who had completed high school, leave alone gone to university. But he'd moved to Beijing after finishing university. And he said he had only one daughter. So I said, why only one daughter? You can have more than one now. He said, you think I can afford more than one? Because one child is more than I can. As a middle-class Chinese, I can't afford to have more than one child. So why would I want to have more than one child? And he said, because I have only one child, I can afford to have support her through school and university, and then perhaps for a little later, until I retired. So these questions are a little more, shall we say, complex than, yes or no answers can
Yeah, you want to respond
suggest.
to about how prevalent Confucianism was or is?
I think it was, a general philosophy. Now, I'm not very sure about how if everyone knew about it, but it certainly spread because it was, emphasized by these other philosophers also. So, and it became, as I said, the identity of the Chinese. I mean, it was also.
I think that's where I would put it. What you say applies for almost all faiths, right? A lot of people would be. I mean, as you said in India, right? You call yourself a
Yeah.
Hindu. Uh, have you read the Vedas? Do you even need to read the Vedas to be a Hindu? Right? You don't need to. So I suppose the same kind of a thing would obtain in China. So it's not. I agree with what. So all the people I've met who practice mainland Chinese, whom I've met who practice religion of one kind or the other, for them it's a blend.
Yeah.
You're a Taoist in the morning, you're a
Yes.
Buddhist in the afternoon, you're a Communist Party apparatchik in the evening. I mean, it's been a syncretic. I think the idea of a ring-fenced religion is not Asian, right? At least Indian or Chinese. It's a Middle Eastern or a European thing where you have a ring fence where you say you're a member of this club only if you do this, and you can only be a member of this club. I think Indian and Chinese were quite comfortable being members of all clubs at the same time.
So just talking about that, there was a monk called Hu Yuan. And what he said was that instead of all following the rituals of Buddhism, he said this is pure land Buddhism. And so what he said is that every person should just say Namo Amitofo, Namo Amitofo. And this is what I heard whenever I went to Fa Yuan temple. Simplified it by you just don't have to follow all the rituals and everything. Just make it easier. And they also talk about people's Buddhism. And what is that? It's all about society and how Buddhism can, it's Sinicized Buddhism, how Buddhism can improve the society. It also deals with some business issues. It's not just celibacy and all that. You have to have more bodhisattvas if you want the society to flourish. So whereas monks would not marry, would not have children, but Sinicized Buddhism meant that you don't have to have celibacy, you have bodhisattvas. One of the bodhisattvas who became the Avalokiteshvara was Kuan Yin, a very well-known deity in China. It's a woman transformed from a man to a woman because they realized that it was a patriarchal society. They needed a woman who was the goddess of mercy. So the last time when I went in 2019 to China, I realized in the Fa Yuan temple, Kuan Yin was always there. But this time she was holding a baby in her arms, which meant that the policy was going to change, I realized. So Kuan Yin was supposed to be the figure who, encouraged people to have babies, and, this is what the government probably wanted.
Very interesting. We have time for a couple of more questions, and then why don't you take the first question and then we'll go to the second question at the back.
Yeah, so my question is Confucius and Taoism. So what's the difference? Buddhism we understand being in India, but between the two, what's the difference and what's the similarity?
The difference is Taoism is it covers a much wider aspect. It says, go with it, go with it, whatever comes. Be flexible, believes in yin and yang. Environmental issues are common between Confucianism and Taoism, but the family issues and all, and what I spoke about, Guangxi and Mianxi and all that, those are more about the society. Taoism is more about a much wider perspective of society. It also deals with society, but it's a much wider perspective.
And there's a lot of supernatural in Taoism, right? Like spirits and...
Yeah.
Which you don't have that
those
much in.
Clouds flying over and all that. What interesting thing is, what Taoism I read is that if the dragon flies too high, it will freeze and fall down. What does that mean?
Right.
If a country tries to show that it's too powerful, it will fall.
Yeah. So an analogy in the Indian context would be, there are a lot of folk religions in India which predate Vedic Hinduism, right? So, animist, even if you go to rural areas, I'm sorry? Yeah, not tribal. These would be animistic religions or faiths which would be in rural areas, even practiced to this day. and then Vedic Hinduism comes later, and sort of it coexists, right? So it's a similar. Taoist would have been the substrate on which everything else sort of grew. But very rough analogy, but that's what I would say.
Just a quick comment on the.
Was it you who raised the hand, or was
Yeah.
it somebody else at the back? No, it was her.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, I'll just comment and then pass it to him. Just a quick comment on the coin example. There's been growing research that rather than giving money to have children in more than one Southeast Asian society, including China, educating men to be more participative in child rearing has had a greater effect on encouraging people to have children. And one of the reasons why the women are pushing back on children is that there's not enough help and support for child rearing in the home, and they're not able to afford the care. So I think that even that social change
Yes.
is having an impact.
Yes, recently I read about a two-side marriage. What is that? You get married, but the woman lives with her family, her parents, and the man lives with his family. They meet over the weekends. Why? Because the woman can work, because the grandparents will look after the child. The man lives on his own so that they don't have a conflict and they don't try to, dominate over the woman. It's very strange. The other thing I found is that somebody in the party said that let there be an easier divorce system. Otherwise, it was difficult. And in the Confucian temple, I heard, this was a long time ago that it happened, that 90 couples were made to stand before the temple and to pledge not to be divorced. So this Confucianism was also about not being divorced. And now a lot of people don't want to get married, so they will have to think of something. Also, I read that now if there's a child that's born, they will do it will be registered, even if they're not married. So it's a bit of a desperation to increase the population.
Yeah, I think we should end here. I just want to end this conversation with an experience, right? One of the challenges for people in my line of work is to answer the question, to what extent do ancient ideas and philosophies like Confucianism or Sun Tzu's art of war affect Chinese foreign policy today, right? So one of the questions which was asked is, to what extent does the art of war affect Xi Jinping's decisions on foreign policy? And I talked to Chinese scholars, some of whom said, it's all different, they're all modernized, the guy's an engineer, he would probably be thinking about engineering and, modern science when he's doing foreign policy rather than art of war or Confucius or Han Feizi or somebody. Right? So there are others who said that no, they are very much, most party leaders read their history, read their philosophy, they're extremely well educated about their traditions and culture, and that creates a sort of mental architecture of decision making, and that architecture influences decision to this day. So finally, my distillation of it is, if you want to ask this question, which is part of this conversation, right? Traditions, how much do classical philosophies affect modern life? I would give you this analogy. Imagine you're doing archery, right? And you have to shoot, you have a bow and arrow in your hand, and you have to shoot the target. But you're not standing on firm ground. You're standing on a seesaw, right? You're balanced on a seesaw, and the seesaw could, go either way. So you have to balance on the seesaw while doing that. Now, the seesaw is not standing on firm ground. The seesaw is on top of an iceberg which is floating in the sea. Okay? 9/10 of the iceberg is Chinese classical philosophy, right? That's the part which you don't see. Right? That's under the sea. It's still there. That's on which everything is loaded, but it's floating in the sea. But you still have to shoot an arrow, right? So, and the seesaw is your context, your current context, what is Trump doing, or what's the United States, what's China, what's Europe doing, and what's India doing. So that sets the context. And then, of course, there's marksmanship, right? You have to make policy, but your policy might not necessarily be, might not be accurate, right? So I think that's a mental model I've been giving my students and giving people in the armed forces when they want to answer this question, right? Because if you if you get it wrong, you will over-determine it. You will say, oh, everything which Xi Jinping is doing is because what Confucius said 2,500 years ago. That's obviously wrong. But you also can't go and say everything that Xi Jinping does is because, he was an electrical engineer or whatever. He read something in the Wall Street Journal yesterday and therefore he's making his decision today. That's also wrong, right? So I think there is a far more complex way which human decisions
It has
are
to
made.
be engineered, combining different things and looking at.
Yeah, there's layers and layers of this.
Yeah.
And I got the sense when I read two of her books, the Confucius book, which I don't have a copy of today, and then there's the other one, which I would think are to be read in series. There's part one and this is part one and this is part two. They're to be read in series. I like these books because each chapter is about 2 pages. It's not too deep, not too dense. It's easy for you to read because many people who write books on Chinese philosophy write it for themselves, I think, because nobody else can read them. But these books can be read by almost everybody. Right? Very, very approachable. I advise you to get a copy of these and read them, and be much more well informed about China. So on that note, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Poonam, for being a guest.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was very interesting.